Hey, this is Mrs. Warren, your U.S. history teacher, and if you're watching this video, you missed Friday, February 9th, 2018. Today in history, we'll be able, by the time you finish, hopefully you'll be able to describe the Indian Removal Act and how Jackson ignored the Supreme Court and continued on his quest. We're also going to end up finally answering the question, how democratic was Andrew Jackson? Now what we did, we started off with our warm-up. This is on page 34. Go ahead and give this a shot and then check it with another student in class. We started off with an introduction activity. I gave you a map and I gave you two primary sources. What I want you to do is examine all three sources and tell me a story about what is happening from the clues that you get from the documents. Now you're going to write this on a note card or a piece of paper that you have, and sentence 1 has to include the time and place, such as during Jackson's presidency or when Jackson was president. You can't do a specific day on this one because it happened over a long period of time. Also, you have to include a place. Where did this happen? Your map should come in handy for that. And just give kind of a overall statement about what happened. And then in sentence 2, 3, and 4, you're going to tell the story. What's going on? And of course, right away, you'll see that. So you'll turn that into me. And then we go ahead and sit and talk about what really happened, which is the Indian Removal Act. So after you do the note card activity with the sources, please turn to page 37 in your notebook. Remember, you can pause and replay this at any time. The Indian Removal Act has to do with several Indian tribes that were located in the southeast United States. They were forced to move into a smaller area in what today is modern-day Oklahoma. Indian Removal is the title for page 37. Only write what's in yellow. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 was the federal government forcing Native Americans to resettle west of the Mississippi. This allowed white settlers to take their land for gold and for cotton. It was very valuable land, and they felt that the Indians were not using it properly. Now, Jackson justified his actions by explaining to Congress that he was doing this to protect the Indian, that he was taking care of the Indian because of all of the strife and problems that had occurred between the whites and the Native Americans. So this was to protect them. They would be taken to escorted to a place that had land, and they would give them money and supplies. Now, Congress bought the land, but the Supreme Court said this was illegal, but they continued to do so. Now, there was a court case 2 years later. In Georgia, Georgia made a law that said that the Cherokee could not have any white people in their reservation or area of land. So Worcester, who happened to be, I believe he was a missionary, had gone in there, and when they came out, they arrested him. So he sued the state of Georgia. See, the Cherokee and Indian reservations have sovereignty, which means that they get to have their own power and make their own laws, and Georgia cannot interfere. The Supreme Court favored the Cherokee, which meant that the Indian Removal Act couldn't happen. Well, Jackson refuses to enforce this ruling. So, which, it's kind of like judicial review. They looked at it and they said, no, you can't do it. And Jackson said, well, I see you wrote that law. Let's see you try to enforce it. So Jackson takes his power and ignores the Supreme Court ruling. The Army goes down into the southeast. They force the Cherokee to lead and walk to Oklahoma. The Cherokee call this the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears was a forced march by the U.S. Army. 15,000 Cherokee men and women and children. 4,000 died due to lack of resources, food, warm clothing, sanitation. It was an incredibly cruel and difficult journey. Today, the place that they were resettled is the modern-day state of Oklahoma. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind, the overarching question is how democratic was Andrew Jackson? This was probably a game changer for you. When you're studying history, you got to keep things in context. Now, democratic means serving the will of the people, making sure the people's will is done. Did Jackson consider the Cherokee and the Native American his people? Was he serving his people by removing the Native American threat so his people could farm there? Now, I know it's not right, and it's, you probably don't like to look at it that way, but when you're answering these questions for his time period, this is the 1800s. So what we look at as moral and right today is different than what they looked at it, even though today we know it's still wrong. So keep that in mind when you're writing your decision about how democratic was Andrew Jackson. All right, this is a pretty long closing task. Let's get to it. Andrew Jackson. So you're going to take out a piece of paper, title this, How Democratic Was Andrew Jackson? You're going to answer this question that we've been working on all week. So this is going to be your first sentence. And you're going to decide was or was not. I'm going to tell you right now, there is no right answer. There is no wrong answer. What I am looking for is how you can prove your answer. So all week we've been talking about the two sides of the spoil system. Is this something that helped people, or was it something he did on his own to make himself more powerful? Killing the bank. Was this something that helped people, being democratic? You need to tell me why. The spoil system, you need to explain why. The Indian Removal Act, explain why. For instance, I think Andrew Jackson was not a democratic president. One of the reasons why was proved in the documents about the spoil system. The spoil system, and that made him more democratic. So you have to explain each one and how it comes back to this question right here. Did you give evidence to prove this? Okay, so when you're done with this, this will be turned in. It kind of gives me an idea of if you understood the topics of Jacksonian democracy. And let me know if you have any questions at all.